So let's see. Again, you can ask other questions if you want, but meanwhile, we'll start with this. Okay, so the first question is about learning Torah versus working, possibly also helping other people. Torah versus other things. The truth is a very interesting topic in terms of historically, whether we talk about different mahalchim in our approach to, is it Torah in Derech Eretz, is it Torah on its own? So let's just say some basics on what everyone agrees on, and then speak out a little bit of what people don't agree on, but okay. Everyone agrees, I'm talking about in terms of the different mahalchim, which are within the camp, if you want to call it. So everyone agrees that Torah is primary. That means the Torah is the ikar, and that is a person's focus. That everyone agrees upon. Where there's a subtlety is, what's our attitude to, number one, the outside world, number two, secular studies. What's our attitude towards that? So, do we say that any grasp of the secular world or any attitude to do with giving chashivas to the outside world is treif? Because what you're then doing is you're idealizing their ideas. And the truth is, there's a halacha about that. I don't know if we mentioned this before, we mentioned it in a different context. There's a halacha of lo sechonim. Now, lo sechonim is a halacha that you're not allowed to unnecessarily idolize, in fact, forget the word unnecessarily. You're not allowed to idolize a non-Jew. Now, what that means is, let's explain. That means is, I've got to be careful how I do this. Maybe I shouldn't be saying this, but okay, I'll say it anyway. You have to be careful. Are you allowed to put, okay, I shouldn't say this. Mutter Shushagin. I'll say it anyway. Are you allowed to put pictures of football players up in your room? Okay, so here's the issue. It's a lomdish shayla. I'll explain to you the lomdish shayla. When you look up to that player, are you looking up to their skills? For sure, right? I think they're amazing because I love how skillful they are. That's true. Or does it also come with idealizing, looking up to them as a person? It's like lomdish. Can you separate what they do from who they are? Meaning, if I tell you, I've got a picture on my wall, of some great player. So, but the picture is because I love his skills. I think he's amazing. He's incredible. Him as a person, I don't care about him. Like, he's probably a lowlife. And I don't live up to his ideals. We're Jewish, we're frum, we don't have those as ideals. And therefore it's no problem to have the picture on the wall. Because the picture's only there because of the skills. I enjoy the skills. Lomdish. Or do you say, no, it's a problem because you can't separate the man from his skills. Right? When you say, this guy is the bee's knees, that's it. What you're basically saying is, yeah, okay, it starts because you admire his skills, but it's coming from a place of, oh wow, he's just so cool, he's amazing. Now what that does is, consciously and subconsciously, but we'll take question in a second, is say, that's my value in life. And let's be honest, yeah? Let's be honest. If you imagine now, your favorite football player, yeah? Your favorite football player, and he was now to come in the room, you'd get a geschmack out of it. You'd say, wow, that's really choshev. Can I have your autograph? I don't actually know what that means, because what's the point? And no one's quite understood that. What does that mean? Someone signed something for you. Brilliant. But anyway, wow, can I come near you? Can I get your autograph? That's called idealizing a person. It's called idealizing a person. And in fact, you get an excitement about him. Now bring a choshev rov into the room. Would you idealize him in the same way? Probably not. You know why? Because the world has pumped you with ideas, and this is what media is all about, and they pump you with, wow, that's cool, that's amazing, he's fantastic, he's worth this amount of money, and he's very, very skillful, and so, wow, he's important, and they don't do as much advertising, for good reason, about the Gedolei Yisrael. So, do you feel the same way? If you don't, and that's the problem the Gemara is saying, lo sechonim. There's a problem of idealizing a person. That's the issa that you're not allowed to do. Now, if you're going to tell me, as I said, that you've got the picture on the wall because you idealize his skills and not the person, no, okay, But if you're really being deep down honest about yourself, really what you're saying is, I admire that guy more than I admire a Rav. Now, by the way, again, you've got to be real with yourself. If that's what you're up to, there could be worse aveirus in terms of, things to do. But on the other hand, you can see why Chazal said that that's not ideal. That's not ideal. Because you're looking towards the wrong thing, right? So, yeah, we're in the middle of questions.
So, if the saying, if the guy wasn't good at football, let's say he was just like a normal guy on the street, I wouldn't look up to him. I wouldn't know who he is.
For sure.
So isn't that the reason to say that I admire his skill, not him?
Yes, but the point is, you're right, I agree with you, it starts with skill. He's got something that you don't have, right? But that's the reason why you actually admire him is because of his fame. That's why you're admiring him. Because there could be some guy in Hendon Park, locally, who's actually incredibly skillful. You're not going to admire him in the same way. You're not. Why? He doesn't have the same fame. Fame pumps up a person. And therefore, it's actually, what you're admiring is not just the skill, it's the person. If you're going to say, I only admire the skill, no, but it's hard to say. I was reluctant to say it because I don't want you to think now, I'm a guy, because whatever this, okay, I'm just saying in pure terms, understand that what you're doing is, you're looking up to the wrong world. Which again, when you're younger is okay, because you'll mature from that. But if you've still got those pictures on your wall when you're 35, that's a bit of a problem. By then, snap out of it. Then you suddenly realize that the guy's a low life, he's got nothing to him, and he can't even string two sentences together. So that's not what we look up to. Yeah?
Ask a question, I'll just do it. Add a question to the list.
You can add a question to the list, yeah, but we're in the middle. But yeah, okay, go on.
I don't want to offend anyone, it's a bit of I know some people may want to do it, but is it? No, but I'll start the question.
Just say it, spit it out.
Is it correct that you're not allowed, for example, I'm not talking about whether you're allowed to have a female teacher, I already asked that question, but if you have a female teacher teaching you, is it correct, you're not allowed to just chat to her randomly in the lesson, nothing to do with the work?
Okay, well, you're asking hard questions here. Okay, we'll see if we get to that. Maybe it's on the list of Hechsherim. Okay, right, so let's bring this back into line. Okay, so the first thing is, what do you look up to? What do you look up to? And that's something which is very, and you've got to be real with yourself, because I'm being honest. I've often said about myself that I find football very, very powerful, and I enjoy it very much, and that's why I don't go near it. Because at my age, you and hopefully you've developed a little bit. You've been to yeshiva, you've learned, etc., etc. You know that that's not my value system. I recognize it as being very powerful and very, very much a draw and a pull. And depending on who you are, when you're younger, you can get away with it, as it were. It's not like the worst aveira, but you need to mature and move beyond that. Either now, or when you get to yeshiva, or eventually, you've got to move beyond, because that's not our value system. Now, why do I say that? Because bringing that back into life, so that was the big debate about Torah in something. Bring in Torah with the outside world. As soon as you bring in the outside world and you value the outside world, what you're doing is you're looking up to the outside world. That's the claim against bringing in secular studies in some way. And of course, at the same time, you are in some way equating it to the Torah. And anybody who espouses, from people who espouse Torah and Derech Eretz, will say, no, of course the Torah is the Ikar, but the Derech Eretz is there as well in order to be studied and understood. And so now that's the debate. Do you say, but 1 minute, you're making secular studies an ideal? Or do you say, no, it's not an ideal. Nobody's talking about it being an ideal. And so why am I doing it? Well, number one, I've got to earn a living. So you have to have a skill, a trade. So you have to know, have to be aware of secular studies. That's one aspect. But it's much more fundamental machlekes about it, and it's much more subtle, the machlekes. It's much more profound than what we think it is. Because secular studies also is actually an incorrect phrase. What does secular studies mean? What's secular? Is goisha? So goisha studies would mean perhaps learning Christianity. Maybe. And even that, by the way, it could be that you're supposed to learn that in as much as to learn why it's wrong. But if you say, learning maths, physics, How do we get to English in a second? Maths, physics, chemistry, is that secular studies? I thought Hashem made the world. So, in which case, ultimately what you're studying is Hashem's world. So in what way is it secular? So it means it's secular compared to Torah. Compared to Torah. Torah is the neshama of the world. And this stuff is chokhmah b'goyim tamin. It's chokhmah, it's the outer casings of the world. Now they say, I haven't seen this inside, but they say that the Vilna Gaon used to make a siyum every year on kol ha-chokhmos kulam. All wisdom. I don't know what that means exactly. It's a great one. That means the Vilna Gaon knew everything, all wisdom, not just Torah. Why? Because he understood, when he saw all wisdom, he understood it as Torah. In order to understand Hashem, it's Hashem's world. You can't call maths, physics, chemistry, biology, you can't call it secular. What's secular about it? It's Hashem's world. I don't understand how you can call it secular. One second. So the debate becomes much more subtle. If you really want to know, is it what we don't value these things? It's HaKadosh Baruch Hu's world. But now the question is, but where's your focus? Where's your focus? Meaning to say, yes, the Vilna Gaon made a siyum on kol ha-chokhmos kulam, all wisdom. But that's because all wisdom has a value. And he saw it in the prism of Torah. He saw it as expressing Hashem's wisdom in the world. As the Rambam says, that you have to look at the world, to be misbainin, understand it, and see the neflois habayra, see HaKadosh Baruch Hu, see Hashem in the world. That's absolutely correct. The question is, as chinuch, as an education, what do you espouse? What do you talk about? Meaning, if you say, because the Vilna Gaon can do that, but your average guy in the street, if he's going to spend time investing in his secular studies, let's call it that, he's going to be taken away from his Torah. And then the question is, so what's the reason why we're studying secular studies? Is it because of parnasa? That's one reason. I need to earn a living. That's important. So that's one reason. Or is it, in principle, I'm learning all of this in order to be able to come close to Hashem, which is correct in theory, but it's quite hard to do in practice. Meaning, you're going to spend your whole life, and also, Torah matei aleha, what will be? So it is definitely true that if a person is learning secular studies and he sees Hashem in that, he's actually doing a mitzvah. Believe it or not, he's doing a mitzvah. But is everybody on that level? And do we say that the trade-off is worth it? In other words, invest and spend time learning secular studies at the cost of Torah. That now becomes a big debate. In other words, what I mean is the debate between people who are genuine Ovdei Hashem. Right? It's a debate here. Is it a value because you're learning how to come close to Hashem? Or do we say, no, you're going for that which is lower grade, why don't you invest in Torah, which everybody recognizes is the primary? So that's much more subtle. What I would say as a PS, and again, I'm allowed my opinion, and there are Gedolei Yisrael from different sides, but I'm just saying as an interesting PS, it would seem that as a chinuch model, that means as a successful chinuch model, it would appear to be that having pure Torah seems to be a better model than a Torah im Derech Eretz model. Meaning, because people find it hard to sort of have these two systems. And what we're saying actually, in some way, Torah Derech Eretz is actually a very high standard to demand of a person. He's got to learn all his secular studies, the Shem mitzvahs, coming close to Hashem. It's very hard to do that, and a lot of people can't manage that. They don't see that, they just see it as totally separate. So, it would seem to be as a chinuch model, but that's really a subtlety. What I'm trying to bring out here is at least appreciate there are different sides. There is people that and genuine Gedolim who have said this. My personal understanding is, if you look at what's been successful, l'doros is those that immerse themselves more in Torah, that works. For example, look at nowadays, yeah? When you finish school, you go to yeshiva, right? Bez Hashem. In yeshiva, you don't have a mixture of secular studies and Torah, generally. Generally. In yeshivas, I'm talking about across the spectrum. Mizrahi, Haredi, etc. No, so I'm talking about even YU people, they go to YU often after a couple of years in yeshiva. They'll say you finish high school, now you go to yeshiva a couple of years, then afterwards there'll be whatever, a YU model. But I don't think that the YU ideal is that they spend the initial years after school, I don't know for sure, that they spend the initial years after school. So that's interesting. That means to say that even everybody recognizes that this was in Volozhin. In Volozhin, when they told them, you've got to introduce secular studies to the Volozhin yeshiva, they closed it down. They closed down Volozhin yeshiva. They said we'd rather not have a yeshiva than have a yeshiva that also teaches secular studies, because it's the wrong message. It's the wrong hashkafa. Can't do it. It's wrong. We don't change Torah. We don't dilute the Torah. Ultimately, if you're going to be in yeshiva, if you're now doing Kodesh Kadoshim, to really grow in Torah, you have to immerse yourself in Torah. So that's why everybody basically recognizes in today's world, across the spectrum, there has to be a time in your life where you are completely immersed in Torah study, because that is the ultimate way to grow. It's posh, it's obvious when you see it. You can only really grow in something when you're immersed in it. When you're in it, you're actually living it. And to start doing a bit of, wishy-washy, I do a bit here and then I do a bit there, it doesn't go. It just doesn't go. So therefore, even those that speak about Torah and Derech Eretz and learning secular studies and the value of that, they also recognize that to really grow in Torah, you need undiluted Torah time for that. Now again, that does not mean that after a person leaves yeshiva that he can't keep growing in Torah. He can, it's true, but it's not the same. It's not the same. When somebody's there all the time with atmosphere and everybody's learning together, everyone's davening together. And this brings me to another point, which you mentioned, to do with Torah versus working. And it's a subtlety, but I want to bring this out. I picked this up, I happened to see this yesterday in the Hashkafa Sefer of Rev David Soloveitchik, who was nifta just around about a year ago. Rev David Soloveitchik was the son of the Briskerov, grandson of Reb Chaim Soloveitchik, and he was a fiery person. He had Yiras Shamayim. I once took a group of people to see Reb David Soloveitchik. We knocked on the door of his house. We were petrified to knock on the door. We knocked on the door, and we had a guy with us. He got us in, and he was like mamash fire. And just because he had like Yiras Shamayim on his face, we got in. We went in there. He had a kitchen. It was the size. I'm not joking. This kitchen was so small. It was like from where I am now to the wall, like there to here. That was about it. It was like a tiniest kitchen you've ever seen. And we go into his house, and we just filed past, and everyone said shalom, whatever it was. Interesting. There was one guy. I can't help but say this. There was one guy that we had there. We had a group of about 20 boys, 16-year-olds, your age probably, and as we filed past, everyone just said shalom, shalom, whatever, whatever there, like that. And one guy, he screamed at him in a nice way. He was hard of hearing, so he spoke loud automatically because of that. And he said in Yiddish, he said, only Torah, only Torah. That's what he screamed at him. The only guy. And he was the only guy in the whole room that was thinking about leaving school and going to the army at that point in time. The only guy. Everyone else, I had no idea how he knew. Nobody said anything to him. Everyone else just walked past, and this guy, he said, oh, no, Torah, only Torah. Anyway, so I remember that evening we had a talk from Shraga Kallis, and he said, wow, you saw David Soloveitchik, you couldn't get over it. He says, you have no idea. He said, you realize there's a world, there's like a world before you've seen David Soloveitchik, after you've seen David Soloveitchik, you've seen Yiras Shamayim. Yiras Shamayim. I'm saying this as a Hakdama to what he told us, what I saw in the Sefer. He was a person of fire, real like hardcore. So, and he says something in the Sefer I saw, and he says like this, and it works both ways, what he says this. It's l'chumra in both ways. He says, what's the definition, careful how I say this, but I'm just going to say it. What's the definition of a balabos and what he called a ben Torah? Okay. So he said, a balabos means, let's call it a working individual, and a ben Torah, we'll call him someone learning Torah. If you would have asked me, I would have said, what's so hard to define? Yeah, balabas, some guys working, and a ben Torah is somebody who's in yeshiva or something. He didn't say that. He said it depends, it all depends on, are your aims and ideals in ruchnius? Are your aims and ideals in the spiritual world? Where do you want to grow? Where's your focus? Now that works both ways, Rabbi Isai, because you could be in yeshiva, but your aims and ideals might not be in learning and in davening and avodas Hashem. It might not be. So it means you could be learning all day and not have the Ben Torah label. On the other hand, you could be somebody who's working, and you ask the guy, what are your aims and ideals? What do you really want? He says, I want to know this Masechta that I'm learning at the moment, and I want to improve my midas, and I want my davening to be better, and I'm working on this, that, and the other. That's where he really lies. I have a person in my head, I'm just thinking about him now. He doesn't even live in this country, and this person is amazing Kiddush Hashem, amazing. He works, and he earns parnasa, but he loves Avodas Hashem. He loves it. He just, every time he sees me, tell me a Dvar Torah, tell me something. You hear what I'm doing now? I'm learning this Masechta, I'm learning that Masechta, I'm working on this, I'm working on that. That's what he cares about. That is meaningful for him. So if that's what's meaningful in your life, says Reb David Soloveitchik, you're a Ben Torah. Yeah? And if what's meaningful in your life, well, I mean more than mean. Everybody says Torah is meaningful. Of course, davening is meaningful. But that's my aim. My aim is, that's what I'm working on now. What's the natural conversation that you have with that person? Is it, what you're working on? That's where my heart is. If that's where your heart is, then great, you're a Ben Torah. I'm saying, he just said, a Ben Torah is someone whose focus is, and she'ifos, their aims and ideals are in the world of the spiritual, and a balabos is somebody whose aims and ideals is in the world of Olam Hazeh. And that's what he says. And I'm giving a parish to that, which is, that means that works both ways. You can have a guy in business who's a Ben Torah, because that's his focus and ideal, or you can have a guy in yeshiva who's actually, quote unquote, a balabas. That's not his ideal. In other words, it's a mentality, which also relates to what you're saying, Torah versus working. Ultimately, get something very clear. Very, very clear. Whatever you're going to do, you've got to be a Ben Torah. That means to say your ideals and your focus and your drive has to be in the world of the spiritual. That's what it's got to be. So don't get distracted by people saying, oh, he's a balabas, he's a this, he's a that. It becomes petty and silly. Because then what happens is you go, yes, I used to be in the Shiva and I was from then, I learned then and I dedicated my life to Hashem then. But now I'm working, so I'm basically, my davening's down the drain and my learning's, up the creek, and that's all a joke because that's who I am. I'm now this. That's incorrect. The person has to know you're always a Ben Torah. A Ben Torah means that's going to be my focus. What are you going to do with your life? Are you going to do business? Are you going to do this? Are you going to do that? That's a distraction. It's a Yetzer Hara. And you will speak about it in yeshiva for hours, for days, possibly over years. You'll sit around and having discussions about, should you work? Should you learn? And in your life, you'll also have to decide, should I work? Should I learn? How should I do it? Should I get to Kailo for 10 years, 1 year, 3 years, 2 years? Whatever you're going to discuss, I'm telling you now, one thing you have to know for sure, don't be distracted by putting yourself in a box. I learned, so I'm already a tzaddik. Who says? Maybe Hashem wants you to be pushing yourself a bit more. You've got to be, it's good that you're learning, you're in Kailol, but take it seriously. I'm a balabas, I'm a nobody. So don't get distracted by the labels. That's labeling. Avodas Hashem is about being real. Are you trying to come closer to Hashem? End of. And by the way, that cuts across the board. Whether you're Haredi, whether you're Mizrahi, whatever it is, ask yourself one genuine question. Are you trying to come closer to Hashem? If you are, great. If you're not, start working on yourself to come closer to Hashem. We're not, again, you've got to be real with where you're up to, but I'm saying that's a very important definition. The boxes, the labels, who are you? I'm this, I'm that, I'm the other. We're Ovdei Hashem, that's the bottom line. We're trying to serve Hashem. That's what, and if you're not yet, so we're trying to work on it. Okay. So that is a very important point. I didn't necessarily answer what's better, Torah working, this, that, the other. Depends on the person, depends on who he is, where he's up to in his life. What is it, Chunas HaNefesh, how talented is he, should he be doing this, should he be doing that, and ultimately, the leiv pulls you in a certain direction. The more ruchnius, the better. Absolutely. The more learning you can do, the better. The longer you can stay in Kailol, the better. Of course, all of that. Of course. But the nitty-gritty, sometimes we get lost in that nitty-gritty. And we'll have arguments, this, that, the other. The Yetzer Hara does, I see it all the time. It's brilliant. You'll spend hours discussing in yeshiva, this hashkafa, that hashkafa, and the whole thing, the Yetzer Hara is laughing at you, because all he wants to do is get you to be mevatel your seder and discuss hashkafa instead of learning in front of you right now. I'm telling you 100%, I've seen this time and again. So anyway, that's that. Next, Chil Hashem. Okay, what is a Chil Hashem? The Gemara says in Yuma, what is Chil Hashem? If a person, there's different levels of Chil Hashem, but if a person sees you acting in a certain way and it's not appropriate, and so they'll say, that's what it means to be a Ben Torah. That's what it means to be frum. That's how people act. Now careful what you say here, because I'll tell you why. Because people take that to the wrong, they get it wrong. Because they'll say, that's how they act. Now, let's think about it. I'll give you a subtle, controversial example. This thing about, you go on a plane, and they've given you a seat next to, I'm sure you've seen on a plane before, you see some guy, some Hasidic guy, let's say, is now put next to a woman on the plane, and he doesn't want to sit there, and he's making a fuss, and the steward and the stewardesses, whatever they are, they're trying to arrange a different seating, and it's, now, Chil Hashem or not Chil Hashem? So, it's not so poshut, because you're thinking to yourself, with one hand, it's terrible, because look, he's making such a fuss, and da-da-da-da. Now, one second, hold on, stay a second. Wait. The Chil Hashem is going to be when they say that the Jews are bad people according to Jewish Torah standards. Again, if you say, let's say I say to you, can you please buy me a ham sandwich, right? And you say, no, you're a Jew, I can't do it for you. That's never. Oh, you Jews are so unhelpful because you don't buy. I asked you, your fellow colleague who's Jewish, asked you to buy a ham sandwich, and you didn't do it. It's so unfair of you. Chil Hashem, because you're not showing that you're a kind person. Well, you've got a principle here that you don't buy. You can say it to them in a nice way. I'm very sorry, I can't buy a ham sandwich because it's against my Torah, and we can't do that. But if you say, is there an Issa? Pashtus, yeah. There's a Tosfos in Avodah Zorah that says if they're anyway blatantly going to do it themselves, maybe it's not also because...
for a year.
Yeah, for another year. Yeah, for another year. Sorry. Well, a secular Jew, whatever says to you, can you please... I've had this question many times that people asked, they've asked this shaila. You work in a workplace and there's a non-from Jew there says, are you going out to lunch? Do you mind getting me the, whatever it is, chicken sandwich in M&S? So, if you say no, is that Chil Hashem? Chil Hashem only means if they're going to say that you're doing something that is contrary to Torah. So that becomes very subtle, because if the guy's be given a seat next to a woman on the plane, he doesn't want to sit for the next 5 hours at least next to a woman on the plane. He doesn't want to do that. It's not appropriate. Yeah, he's clearly uncomfortable. Quite right. A person should be uncomfortable with that, and he wants to move. Now you'll say, it's a Chil Hashem because what? Because he's makbid on trying to be careful in this area. That's not necessarily Chil Hashem. Now it should be. It's true to say, try and think in advance. Try and hopefully, or if you see this situation happening, try and sort it out in a way that's without making a big scene of it. Okay, but the principle of the matter is what's happening here. Is it just he's making a fuss? It depends what they're going to think out of it. If they're going to think, you Jews are just disgusting. Well, why? He's got principles. That's not necessarily, you have to understand why. What is this situation? Or for example, you got davening, and they say, okay, we'd like a mechitza here because we're going to be davening. Disgraceful, look at you guys. You make women second-class citizens, you shove them into the back room. Now, that's their thought process. We never said that. They've got a warped process. I never said that the woman's a second-class citizen just because she's behind the mechitza. So because that person thinks that way, that's called a Chil Hashem. Not so bullshit. We've got principles. You're allowed to hold on to principles. You're allowed to say we have a mechitza. Now, if they're doing something which is really a Chil Hashem, i.e. something which is against Torah values, and the Gemara says if a person doesn't pay back on time, for a choshev urov not to pay back on time when he can, and he doesn't ask mechila, that I can't pay on time. If a choshev urov can't pay on time, it's called a Chil Hashem. Why? Because you're supposed to represent, you've got the money, you could pay, you didn't just ask for an extension. So for you, so you see, it's a subtlety, but it's got to be something which is contrary to Torah. So what is a Chil Hashem is now, mucking up a secular teacher. To be honest, it's not just a secular teacher, and everyone always thinks that Chil Hashem is only in the eyes of non-Jews. It's also in the eyes of Jews. Sorry to tell you. It could also be a problem with Jewish teachers as well. But certainly with non-Jewish teachers, I don't know how to say, I guess it's excusable if you're a teacher because you hope that they realize that that's how all kids are. But Lamaisa, it's definitely, that is kind of like hard to excuse. Like, what am I going to say? You messed the person up, you muvazah them, you're rude to them, and I'm supposed to tell you that that's not Chil Hashem? I don't know. I mean, I'm not sure how to defend that exactly. But, yeah?
There's also time to what you said to Reuben.
Oh, what?
About working and secular.
You've got to be an example. I can't understand it. Listen, I also mucked up when I was a kid, but now I looked at myself, what am I doing? What were you doing exactly? Why did you do that? It's poshut wrong. You're supposed to be an example of a Ben Torah. Like, you just can't do that. There has to be a time where you actually mature. Yes, it's fun. It's because you know that's what you do in school, Ki'ilu. That's like you've got obligation to muck up. I just don't know how. I cannot give a heter for that. I don't know what the heter would be. I really don't. I don't. And what can I tell you? You'll say every school, they've got that. It's true. Every school has it, but I cannot give a heter. I have no idea what the heter is. Can you lie to a teacher? I have no idea how that could be permissible. I don't understand that. The Gemara says you're not allowed to be. You can't be goynev das, even to non-Jew. Anybody. It's not, no difference between a Jew and non-Jew. You can't be somebody who's dishonest. The female teacher Shiloh will probably have to leave for next time.
You lied to a teacher. You don't lie to a teacher. And so they ask you, did you do that? If you actually did that thing that would cause embarrassment in the Torah, because it's against the Torah, you say no then. Sometimes
it is mutar l'shanas min hashalom. Yeah, but I mean it becomes very tricky then because every guy's just going to lie every 5 minutes because he knows he's just going to get out of it.
Very much.
It's very, very hard. The reality is, I hope that the teachers understand that you guys are still young, but if you really want to know the right answer, there's absolutely no heter to be able to muck up a non-Jewish teacher. I'm really sorry to say that. I would love to give you a heter. I know it's fun, but it just doesn't work that way. Okay, we've run out of time. Questions next time. Bez Hashem, next time we'll try and deal with the other thing.